So he suggested all these measures in Congress to ban funding for ACORN constituted bills of attainder, that they were discriminating against ACORN, and that, he said, was unconstitutional. And then, lo and behold, a few weeks later, ACORN filed a lawsuit with the assistance of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and that lawsuit was heard by federal judge Nina Gershon, and she agreed with ACORN's reasoning that came out of the mouth of Congressman Gerald Nadler. So that's a very significant conflict of interest, and he's refused to address that, and I've asked his press secretary to address it, and usually I just get mocking emails in return. So it's so some of them are pretty funny, actually, but it's just interesting that he won't answer these questions. At the very least, he should recuse himself from having anything to do with any possible investigation of ACORN, but he doesn't seem willing to do that. There is no evidence that ACORN is cleaning up its act, despite the release of the report from the supposedly independent Scott Harshbarger. He's a former Massachusetts Attorney General. He was also president at one point of the liberal group Common Cause, so I don't which is an ACORN ally, and he's long been a supporter and ally of ACORN. So calling him an independent investigator was always a stretch. But the report that he released through his law firm in Massachusetts basically said that there were a few rotten apples, a few bad eggs in ACORN, which is the excuse that ACORN always uses when it gets into trouble, and that there wasn't any. Sure, ACORN had some systemic problems, but they can all be fixed, and current management is doing everything it can to fix the problems that were left by the previous chief organizer, Wade Rathke, the one who had to resign, or he didn't resign. He was actually dismissed after his brother stole the $1 million and he covered it up for 8 years. That report is just a complete whitewash, and if ACORN claims, the chief organizer, Bertha Lewis, claims that they are trying to reform ACORN, but there's just simply no reason to believe her, because she seems incapable of telling the truth, and has distorted the activities in the record of ACORN all throughout the undercover video saga that unfolded in September and October. Remember, every time a new video would come out, she'd say, "Oh, well, they were turned down at the next office, and it's all, and this has been heavily edited and it's taken out of context." And every time she was shown to not be telling the truth. So there are just a few other points that I think probably Hans is going to touch upon. At least I hope he is. Not committing you to anything there, Hans, but there are very serious issues of public trust here involved with ACORN. It wouldn't be such a big deal if they were. It wouldn't be as much of a big deal if they were a corrupt organization that didn't receive federal funding, but they do receive federal funding, and if they receive federal funding, they should be forced to adhere to certain standards of ethical behavior, and they seem incapable of doing that. No one at ACORN seems to know what the budget is. Bertha Lewis says the budget is $20 to $25 million. She's directly contradicted by the national president, Maud Hurd, who in a handbook for liberal activists published last year called by Erica Payne, called the Practical Progressive, Maud Hurd said the annual budget of ACORN was $50 million. In a book that was recently released, an anthology of essays about ACORN's history, Wade Rathke said ACORN's budget was upwards of $100 million. And that came out, that was a book called The People Shall Rule, and it came out just a few months ago this year. So, which is it? 25, 50, 100? Where is all this money going? And finally, there's also the issue of possible money laundering and racketeering, something that ACORN does that I've never heard of any other nonprofit or network of nonprofits doing, is that they routinely transfer 6- and 7-figure sums between affiliates. So money will go, for example, I think there was this one case a few years ago where the American Institute for Social Justice, which publishes the ACORN magazine called Social Policy, they also train community organizers, transferred $5 million to ACORN. Why would they do that? Why wouldn't, if the money were legitimate and it were going to be used for appropriate purposes, why wouldn't somebody just write a check to ACORN directly? Why would it have to go through the tax-exempt American Institute for Social Justice? These questions, people have been asking for some time, but we're not getting any answers from ACORN, and eventually ACORN should be forced to answer these questions. I think the American public will eventually demand it.
Thank you, Matt. Hans, please.
Sure. Matt, if I don't get anything right, you're going to correct me, right? As Matt said, I'm not going to go over all the different accusations that have been made against ACORN. The thing to keep in mind, though, is it's a very far-flung operation. They have operations all over the country. ACORN itself excuse me, claims that it's in 110 cities across the United States. The problem is some of the ACORN subsidiaries do political work. Like, for example, the affiliate that last year received $830,000 from the Obama campaign to do get-out-the-vote work for the campaign. On the other hand, there are other affiliates that are tax-exempt charities. The problem is that they've received $127 million in donations and tax dollars, reportedly, since 1993, and that money is moved around between the many subsidiaries and affiliates with no concern over the propriety or legality of doing that. Now, ACORN fired some of its own directors, such as Ms. Reid, when they started asking questions about how the money was being moved and where it was going, and about the internal operations of ACORN. Basically, this is an organization that is a tangled mess of interlocking directorates where a small group directs the dozens of shell companies that routinely move money, perhaps illegally, around in the millions of dollars. And it's a classic pattern, if you look at the way things are done, that's been used in the past by criminals, particularly the mafia, to launder money and to cover up how money is being transferred. There are numerous violations of the federal tax law, mortgage law, election law, and campaign finance law, yet the Department of Justice and the FBI have not opened any investigation that we are aware of ACORN or any of its affiliates. Neither has the IG at HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and yet HUD has given millions of dollars in grants to ACORN affiliates. Neither has the IRS, despite the fact that there's evidence of tax fraud being committed, not just by the organization, but as we saw in the undercover videos, they were providing advice on how to cover up business activities and make them seem legitimate, which amounts to tax fraud. I want to talk a little bit about the Harshbarger report that Matthew mentioned. I'm not sure who said it's not worth the paper it's written on, but that is true. I'm hoping over the Christmas that I'll get a nice fire going in my fireplace. I could probably use that report for kindling to get it going. Look, I'm a former corporate lawyer. I used to be in-house counsel for a large company, and one of my jobs was to investigate problems within the company, particularly when employees or ex-employees said that wrongdoing had occurred.